We can reconvene our meeting to public session. The board has been in executive session since 6 o'clock to discuss 2 student matters, a litigation matter, a tenure recommendation, and a contractual issue. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Introductions.
Dave Hurst.
Robert Tejan.
Catherine Nadeau.
Jody Monroe.
Holly Dellenbaugh.
Ewan McMahon. John McPhillips.
And John Walston and Lauren Grasso are not able to be with us tonight. Do we have any PIG students or SUPA students visiting us this evening? Welcome. Thanks for coming. Your obligation is to stay until the meeting is over, or 9 o'clock, whichever one comes first. And when we are done, please come up and make sure you sign out on one of the 2 sign-out sheets that are up here so that you get credit for being here. First up on the agenda is our approval of minutes. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the October 23rd, 2024 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Thanks.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. 3 meeting reports. First up is our superintendent's report.
Sure, thank you. I just have one announcement. Next Thursday, November 14th, from 6:30 to 8 o'clock, we are holding a safety forum, a community safety forum at the high school in the auditorium. The evening is intended to talk about the various types of swatting that we experienced and what could be experienced, also to discuss student safety and provide an overview of district policies. Due to anticipated time constraints, we are encouraging people to submit questions in advance of the meeting if possible. We may have time to answer some questions there. But in the information that went out to the community, there's a Google form where people can submit questions, so I'll encourage people to do that. So that's my only announcement for this evening.
Any questions for Jody? Next are our board reports and discussions. I just wanted to recognize all the different Halloween events that took place around all the different buildings in the district, and say thank you to the staff and parents that made all of that possible, and a lot of fun for all of the kids. And that's all I have. I don't know if any have anyone. Go ahead.
A couple of recognition things. We had 3 national merit scholarship semi-finalists, which I thought was pretty impressive. So I wanted to recognize it's Armin Arbecky and Zara Patterson and Sophie Wang. Those were pretty cool. And also we had a student win the regional history meet, which I think may be a first for us, I'm not sure, but Alan Kerr, we did really well on that. So kudos to those guys.
Anybody else? Okay. Next up are our student reports. Do we have anybody here from Student Senate? Come on up.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name's Niara, and I'm a senior student senator. This week, we sent out freshman election ballots. We're currently working on reimagining and funding the backpack program, and as well as preparing for the upcoming food drive. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anybody here from the middle school?
Hi, I'm Maddox, and the BCMS Halloween Ball once again had more than 800 students in attendance, and a great time was had by all. We want to thank our parent volunteers, the staff at the middle school, and Superintendent Monroe for her support of this year's event. We also want to thank all the students who volunteered to help decorate the school.
Hi, I'm Tess. Our fall sports are coming to a close, and we want to again thank all of our fall sports coaches. A reminder that winter sports start on November 18th.
The middle school hosted the first regional chess tournament of the year on Saturday, November 26th. More than 80 players from 20 different school districts participated and 14 BC students came away with medals and trophies.
Next Wednesday, November 13th, the middle school's select choir travels to WMHT to perform a selection for their winter special titled Music for the Holidays that will air at some point in December.
We want to congratulate our varsity girls cross country who was named #1 in the nation this past week, and especially congratulate our classmate Sophie C., who is a member of the team.
BCMS welcomes professional fiddle player Jerry O'Connor on Friday, November 15th, when he will be leading a workshop with our orchestra students.
The Spirit Day Orange and Black competition winner was Mohawk, who claims the MS Totem pole until our next Spirit event.
The BCMS PTO will be publicizing a Spirit Wear fundraiser event this Friday. Look for ordering information on Parent Square before this weekend. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you for coming, guys. Next on the agenda, we have 2 presentations this evening, and the first is our World Languages presentation.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to move the microphone because the kids are a little shorter than I am. No offense, kids. This isn't awkward. All right. Good? Yep. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. So I'd like to thank the board for having me here for a couple minutes to speak, as well as the audience and both in person at home. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about our world language program, kind of past, present, and future, so where we are, where we want to be, where we're headed. Firstly, I want to say our world language program, like all our programs here at Bethlehem, is really built on sort of our mission and our pillars here at Bethlehem. So academics, character, community, and wellness, those are all really embedded into our world language program, and they're at the core of everything we do. So I'd like to start off with a quote here, and I'm going to read part of it, and I'm going to paraphrase part of it, and I'll explain why. So the quote says, "One language sets you in a corridor for life," and I'm going to say multilingualism opens every door along the way. And you'll kind of learn over the course of the presentation why I'm changing it from 2 languages to multilingualism. But I think it's a really good framing device for sort of where we're headed in this conversation. So to sort of talk about our programs K-12, what they look like, I really want to start at the secondary level so we can focus on sort of the long-term expectations and outcomes for our students. With our world language program at the high school, really the expectation is that students explore different perspectives, embrace and demonstrate empathy for other cultures. Particularly with the new iteration of the world language standards in New York State, culture really is at the core of what students are doing. So language is used as a tool to access culture rather than the other way around, where if we think, back to, I know when I was in school, it was so focused on, what are your verb conjugations? What's the rote grammar? And all that stuff is great, right? I was a linguistics major for my master's. So I really enjoyed that stuff. But ultimately, it's a tool to access culture, and so that's really how the new standards frame things. Additionally, we want to help students focus on connecting languages and cultures to their personal and professional lives, right? Because we know that those personal connections, that's how we foster that long-term love of not just learning, but of language. We also want students to feel confident taking risks and communicating in the target language. So as we'll talk about later in this presentation a couple different times, really our target in world language classes is that 90% of what is said or read or communicated in any modality in the class is 90% in the target language. And there's some research that supports that we'll talk about a little bit later. We also want students to understand our interconnectedness and our impact within our local and global communities, right? The local is global, the global is local in the modern world, and so we need students to be able to look beyond themselves and communicate with people whose lives may seemingly be different. Language is the tool to be able to do that. Develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills through language study, right? So as part of studying language, of course, critical thinking is at the core of that. because you need to be able to respond in real time when you don't have Google Translate in front of you if you are trying to have a conversation with somebody, and that is problem solving. And then obviously we want our students to be lifelong learners of languages. What do our teachers do? So as I mentioned, we're working toward a minimum of 90% target language use in the classroom, establishing a comfortable and safe classroom environment for students, right? We want, as mentioned on the prior slide, we want our students comfortable taking risks, right? Stepping outside of their comfort zone, and we need our teachers to establish that safe space to do that. Additionally, we want to assess students based on what they can do versus what they know. Right, so this is kind of a larger goal in education in general, where we really want to focus on what assets our students are bringing to the table. What can they do? What skills do they possess? How can we help continue to grow those skills? The responsibility of our teachers is also to design curriculum experiences that connect students to the real world and other content areas. Right, we want to make it relevant. Relevance is at the core of modern education, because if it's not relevant, it's not going to engage students. It's not going to help them build those real-world problem-solving skills that we want them to have to be successful in the global world. We also want to differentiate instruction to meet students' needs and interests, right? We always want to meet students where they're at. That's no different in a world language classroom. And we also want it to be high interest, because when it's engaging, when it's relevant to students and their lives and they can see the applications of it, they're more likely to engage with it more. We also want our teachers to demonstrate a personal passion, enthusiasm for the target languages and cultures, and I can say we have no problem with that here at Bethlehem. I actually just got off a field trip to New York City with our Spanish 3 classes at the high school. We went to see a wonderful play down in Midtown Manhattan called Gringa, which tells the story of a Puerto Rican immigrant to the United States who then moves back to Puerto Rico and is sort of a woman without a country, where she's too American to sort of fit in Puerto Rico, and she's too Puerto Rican to fit in America. And so it's kind of about her journey with that. And it was such a wonderful experience. And by the way, the play all in Spanish. So our Spanish 3 students really got a lot out of that. And that was all put together by our teachers, who obviously have such incredible passion and enthusiasm for Spanish language and culture, and as well as French. So proficiency targets, these are developed by ACTFL. I'm not going to go into these in super detail, but in general, high school programs typically are exiting students at either the intermediate or advanced levels. In general, the superior and distinguished levels are, the distinguished level is really native-like fluency, which can take a lifetime to develop. But obviously, we know exposure is a key tool to do for this. So, we are continually working at ways to help our students increase proficiency. So let's talk quickly about the New York State standards. So this is an ongoing initiative from New York State. In the last couple of years, they've completely revised the world language standards, where again, things are no longer just focused on grammar and verb conjugations and memorizing vocabulary. It really is much more about communication and understanding culture first and foremost. So we can see with our first set of standards, it's focused on interpretive communication, interpersonal communication, presentational communication, where these are really the 3 key ways that students should be utilizing language. Next, this is where we can see culture really being brought into it. So standard 4, we have relating cultural practices and products to perspectives, and then cultural comparisons. And I always like to point out when talking about the cultural comparisons piece, it's not about presenting cultures as a monolith, right? Where, in Spain they do this, in the United States we do this. That's not what it is. We understand that one's engagement with culture is personal. And so it's finding the pieces that we can sort out and look at things that are different from ourselves, but still find that common ground. So when we're thinking about the larger themes that are covered in world language classes, our goals are to cover identity and social relationships, as well as contemporary life. Again, we're trying to give students relevant language. Right? Think about the things that they're talking about in their lives outside of the world language classroom. We want to give them the skills to also talk about these in another language, right? Through multilingualism. Additionally, science, technology, and the arts, global awareness and community engagement. Of course, global awareness is a huge piece of all we're doing in the world language classroom. quickly, I do want to talk about the New York State Seal of Biliteracy. So the Seal of Biliteracy, we've had it for 3 years, about 3 years now. We have had more than 100 students at Bethlehem get through the Seal of Biliteracy, which is so impressive because it has not been around that long. And that there's sort of two pathways to the Seal of Biliteracy, which is either as a native English speaker who takes world language classes at the high school level and can sort of accrue what they need and demonstrate the proficiency that they need to get it, or are English as a new language students who are demonstrating proficiency in a language other than English, and then work through the school context to demonstrate the proficiency in English and their home language. So what's great about it is it honors language wherever it's coming from, whether it's heritage speakers or native speakers, whatever the case may be. But the intent is to just encourage the study of languages. It's to identify high school graduates with language and biliteracy skills for employers, and even multiliteracy skills, where we've had students in the past actually achieve the seal in multiple languages, which is so cool. We also, when students are achieving the seal, we can present information. That's a great thing to see on a diploma, on a transcript, when you're applying to colleges, right? When colleges and universities can see that our students have the gift of multilingualism, it really is a leg up in that context. And in general, the goal is to prepare students with 21st century skills. We know that being monolingual, it's really difficult to work in a larger world now in both economic and humanitarian circles if you only know one language. And so multilingualism really is the path forward. And then we just, in general, want to recognize the value of language instruction and affirm the value of diversity in a multilingual society. So what are the research benefits of being dual language? Obviously, there are brain and cognitive benefits. There are academic benefits, economic benefits, cross-cultural competency, stronger family and heritage connections. So that's a lot of big words. What does that look like? Basically, there's a lot of research. Learning another language fluently literally rewires neural pathways in the brain. Students do get better at, I see you and smiling about this. I know this is your thing. It literally rewires neural pathways in the brain, right? Students get better at critical thinking just by virtue of developing multilingualism skills, right? There's lots of research supporting additionally increased academic benefits. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the economic benefits, where you're more marketable and more competitive in a competitive job space if you have that gift of multilingualism and that skill. Cross-cultural competency, more and more every day, right? The capital region is not unlike other areas of the country. We are growing increasingly diverse, right? And so the ability to communicate with people from other languages and to know about other cultures really gives you a leg up in putting in the work to get to know about other cultures, into helping people and engaging in humanitarian interests. And economic interests. And then with regard to stronger family and heritage connection, what does that mean? Well, we are finding that we have more and more heritage speakers, so students who come from other countries but are not English as a new language students necessarily because they've already hit a certain level of English language proficiency, but they sometimes want to learn more about their own languages, their own cultures, because for families that move to the US, it's a really tricky dichotomy that parents have. Do we speak the home language at home, or do we speak English at home, right? That's really difficult for families sometimes. And so to honor that in our school system is a big deal. So at the elementary level, currently we do not have world language components at the elementary level, but one model that is used in a lot of schools is what's called a FLES program, or Foundational Language Early Start. So just a quick overview of it. FLES programs, basically, they offer quality language instruction. We'll talk a little bit about what quality looks like in a FLES program in a moment, but pre-K through 6 across the United States. The two focus areas are basically the ones I've already talked about, but listening and speaking skills as well as promotion of cultural awareness. Again, tied to those new standards that I talked about, grammar is learned indirectly rather than through direct instruction. So it's not the old days of, conjugate these boot verbs. And then achieving functional proficiency in a world language obviously would be the goal of such a program. So you can see there are a lot in New York State already. They are primarily clustered, as you would expect, in sort of New York City and Long Island. So when we're talking about foundational language early start programs, again, all those benefits that we talked about before also hold here, right? The difference is we're doing it at a younger age, and so those neural pathways are developing at an even younger age. We're helping students be better global citizens and learn more about cultures. And of course, a big piece I want to point out here too is there's a lot of research supporting what it does for helping students to develop empathy skills, which we know is a really important piece in our modern world. So foundational language early start programs do have some minimum time requirements. So for minimum exposure, students need about 90 minutes a week. That's a minimum recommendation. Optimal exposure is 120 to 150 minutes a week, and the key is that it's done consistently. The research shows that if students are only getting it every other week, or Mondays and Thursdays, every third Tuesday of whatever, that kind of consistency doesn't yield results that lead to longitudinal success. And then obviously immersion and practice. The more immersive the experience is with authentic cultural experiences and authentic cultural texts, the stronger skills students will develop. So when we're talking about minimal programmatic requirements, qualified instructors are key to this. You need someone who is certified and has a deep knowledge of world language and skill in that language in order to really tailor instruction to the needs of elementary students, which of course we know work very different. Like I was a high school and middle school teacher all my career. I don't think I could teach elementary. God bless those of you who can. Not for me. But it takes a really unique skill set to pull that off, and so finding people who can do that is a big deal. Curricular alignment, so again, we're talking about those world language standards. We want to be aligned to both the world language standards as well as thinking about how that can dovetail with the other standards and the other curricular pieces at the elementary level. So we're thinking science standards, English standards, all those skills can really sort of dovetail together. We want to engage students in age-appropriate materials that are relevant to them. And again, I already mentioned integrating with the core curriculum, and then we need support from both parents and community to pull it off. So, hurdles to overcome in implementing FLES programs. Resource allocation is obviously a really big deal here. So, funding is, of course, a component of anything in schools, but as much as it's funding, it's also staffing, finding the right qualified people. Particularly in world language, it's challenging, can be really, really challenging, particularly to find people who have world language and that K6 certification. Additionally, scheduling conflicts are significant at the elementary level. There's already a limited amount of time due to requirements. You have to fit in this many minutes of PE and this many minutes of this and this many minutes of that, as well as curricular prioritization. And then we also know the benefits and necessity of early intervention for many of our students at the elementary level, and so time for significant intervention is really, really important at the elementary level, and so that, of course, creates scheduling conflicts on top of scheduling conflicts. Additional hurdles, curriculum development with regard to age-appropriate content and alignment with standards. Again, this is really, really challenging because there's just not a ton of resources out there. As you can see, there's not a ton of FLES programs in New York State or nationwide. There are some, but there's not as many high-interest, age-appropriate materials as we would like there to be, or as there are, for example, at the secondary level. And then hitting alignment with those new standards, there's even fewer materials that are designed specifically with that in mind. And then equity and access. Providing equal opportunities across all of our elementary schools to achieve a program like this would be really important to us, where if we can't provide equal opportunities for all students to access the program, it really makes us question sort of the viability of it, because we do want to provide those opportunities equitably to everyone. And then how do we differentiate to all of our students so they all have access to it in whatever method is most appropriate to their learning needs. So when we're thinking about other hurdles, community and stakeholder buy-in is a must to make this work, and then having appropriate administrative and teacher support. and then sustainability. If we're going to construct a program like this where we're envisioning it K through 6 or pre-K through 6, having a long-term commitment where we can see start to finish what that looks like for kids is a really big deal. And then how do we evaluate the quality of our program going forward and consistently improve based on our evaluation of the program? So I do want to talk quickly about another model that some local schools have sort of developed and brought in. So it's called the Each One Teach One program. So South Colony and Saratoga have established programs, and Shen is sort of in an exploratory phase on this. So the way an Each One Teach One program works, it actually starts with high school students. Each One Teach One is a course that high school students would take, and it would be basically a world language elective. What would happen as a result of that program is that those high school students would then actually be pushing into elementary programs to deliver some instruction. So those programs, the schools that have it sort of see it as a twofold thing. One, it is sort of increasing our pipeline of desperately needed world language teachers, where it really is inspiring them to think about it long term. And then it's also, you're getting the benefits of some world language instruction at the elementary level. So I'll end on another quote here. Language is the road map of a culture. It tells you where its people come from and where they are going. And I think that's a nice quote for us to end on because, you know, we're sort of on this road, and it's really interesting to see where we can go with world language. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm sure there's a few questions from
Absolutely.
From the board, and just a couple that I had. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you with respect to the elementary school. So any teacher would need to be essentially dual certification. You would have to have a certification in the language and a certification at the K-6 level.
That would be ideal, yeah. You would want somebody who has the expertise in both areas. Yeah.
Okay. And then I was curious, and if you don't know this off the top of your head, that's don't worry about it. But at the high school level, I'm wondering if you're seeing a decline at all in the number of high school students that are taking a language all the way through senior year. And I don't know, Dave, if you know
I can
the
speak to that a
answer.
little bit.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so our numbers go from, say, freshman year through senior year, they definitely diminish. We have fewer students than, say, 5 or 10 years ago that continue on the path to take levels 3 and 4 or 5. Again, we've talked about this before. We have so many competing interests in terms of electives here. 10 years ago, if you looked at our elective offerings, they weren't nearly as robust as they are now. So many students, after they finish the Checkpoint B, which is sort of the culminating Regents exam, if you will, quotes around that, because they no longer offer true Regents exams in language. But many students, after they complete the Checkpoint B, decide to move on to other areas because if they're already in, say, music and they want to take technology and they want to take a second social studies elective, like there's only so much room in their schedule. So a lot of decisions are made, and that's where we tend to lose our students from after level 3. There's a pretty substantial drop-off because a large part to do with just the competing interests of so many different options out there. And then the other thing I forgot to sort of mention or put a note in the presentation, when you look at those FLES programs across the state, just keep in mind that K through 6 is considered elementary. So many of those programs are grades 5 and 6 or 5 or just 6. So whereas like we have students take world languages at 6th grade at elementary level, technically by state standards, we are offering world language at the elementary level. So some of those are purely 5-6. So there are districts that have like a K4 building, a 5-6 building, and a 7-8 building. So those that have like 5-6 buildings, they offer world languages in grades 5 and 6, and those kids are changing classes every period, just like we do in our middle school. So you have to dig a little bit deeper to find ones that deal with K3, and many of those are actually more on the bilingual program side, where all of the students in the school are speaking 2 languages. So it's actually even they're not a whole lot on the map, but it's actually even smaller when you kind
Smaller,
of
that
think about it
was-
in those terms. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
to just follow up on your certification, the reason they have to be duly certified or at the very least for 5-6 have the extension is because the tenure they receive is elementary,
Okay.
not world languages.
Okay.
world language,
makes
foreign
sense.
language is a 7-12 tenure area.
Mhm.
So for example, we have 6th grade language teachers and their tenure is elementary, not
Okay.
foreign language.
Does that mean they're not allowed to teach foreign language?
Correct. Because they're not certified to teach it.
That seems like it's something that maybe is a little bit circumvented by the Each One Teach One, could be, right? Is that you now have high school students who would be going down and I suppose wouldn't necessarily be
Correct.
subject to that type of
Right.
restriction because they're not,
Correct.
never getting paid.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'll add one piece to just adding, kind of building on what Dave said. The other thing kind of working against world language programs at the high school is that the reality is the state requirement is they only need 1 credit of world language to graduate high school right now. And so everything beyond that 1 credit is entirely elective. And so that certainly is another contributing factor or a competing interest at least.
Thank you. Other questions?
On the seal by literacy, like, first of all, I mean, hats off to all of our students who have achieved that and all of our teachers who have helped them along the way. That is really impressive. I was just wondering what goes into that. What are the qualifications? What are the standards that students have to achieve to do that?
Yeah, so there are, I'm going to pull up my notes on this actually, but there are multiple pathways into the Seal of Biliteracy. There's different ways that students can achieve it. Typically, we have students do a project as part of it that demonstrates linguistic proficiency. There's also a requirement with regard to certain scores on the English regions, right, to demonstrate that proficiency in English. Other options would be to take sort of a vetted exam in the target language, again, to demonstrate proficiency. But basically, there's a rubric that comes from New York State, and it's got a series of points that students need to achieve in each category. And so you can only achieve the seal if you have X number of points total. And so they get points from a number of different categories.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then on the elementary FLES program, sorry, I'm already forgetting my acronym, Foundational Language Early Start. So if I'm understanding correctly, there are districts and schools, either because of buildings, but are there districts that make choices like, okay, so we are going to do this for, our 5th grade or for our 3rd grade? Is it approached from that angle, or is it approached as like, this is a building wide, we've got to get everybody K through, when folks go forward with that?
So typically it really is targeted at certain grade grade bands where it would be more like, okay, all of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders are going to do this, or maybe, we'll start with a cohort in 3rd grade and then look to expand that cohort, where the next year you're doing 3rd and 4th because the 3rd graders will have moved on. Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Questions?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So you had mentioned that at least in I think it was the high school level, the secondary level, that the classes are sort of 90% immersed. I don't know, I forget the word that you used. Like, how do you handle a kid who maybe comes into that class not quite up to par with the other kids and doesn't really understand, and if
Yeah.
90% of the instruction is in the second language? Like, how do you make sure that he's getting up to speed? Or she?
Absolutely. So very similar actually to our English as a New Language program. The goal with world language programs when they're focusing on that 90% piece is comprehensible input, where even if you're speaking 90% or presenting 90% of the linguistic elements in the course in the target language, you are providing enough pieces around it so that the input is comprehensible. So gesticulation, realia. So realia would be like if I'm talking about a Chromebook, I'm holding up a Chromebook. Anchoring images, repetition, modeling is a huge piece of it. So this is where really the skill and passion of our teachers is a really, really big deal. And this is that piece where teaching is, as much art as it is science, where they're truly, I've done, oh God, like 8 observations already this week in my world language classes. It's been a bit busy week. But the key is our teachers are so good at creating that comprehensible input because that's really at the heart of world language instruction. Yeah, great question.
And then just lastly, I suppose since I took 2 years of Spanish and don't know anything anymore, do we have any way, I mean, I assume we don't track anything, but like how many of these kids go on to actually be functional in the second language, after high school and they graduate? Do we have any sense of like what percentage of these kids actually have usable second language skills?
So it's a great question. I would say the seal of biliteracy is probably our best tool for that
Right.
long-term right now. So, we've had more than 100, so I would say more than 100 right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Merci beaucoup, c'était un plaisir.
Yeah.
I love speaking French. It took 7 years, I guess. But
Très
I also
bien.
live right next door. Anytime I can get up to Montreal and speak French, it's a huge, huge benefit. Your point on brain benefits and cognitive skills, is well made. As you said, you're speaking to the choir here, but the data are so dramatic in terms of how much it improves your ability to learn other stuff, as well as empathy. It's math, right? You actually do better in math because you speak French, which sounds weird, but is absolutely true. I'm guessing that the reduction in high school students taking foreign languages, you're not seeing a demand for additional languages being offered. Is that true? I know before your time we used to have Latin and Chinese and so on.
Yeah, what we are finding, so I can only speak to sort of anecdotally what I'm seeing. And so when I see course drop requests or students not signing up to take the classes, what I'm seeing on the drop request more than anything is that students are stressed because they're also, are students who are typically inclined to take our advanced, level 4, level 5, level, 3, 4, 5 languages. These are also our students who are taking AP or college in the high school, and so ultimately, even though world language is the class that they have a 95 in, they're going to cut it because they're stressed about AP computer science or whatever the case may be. That seems to be the driving factor right now, anecdotally, from what I'm seeing.
Okay. My 11th grader did exactly that. So
Yeah.
For the FLES stuff, is there a person taking leadership of this? What are our concrete next steps to make this go forwards?
So I would say you're looking at him.
Cool.
So next steps, the key to making this all work is that obviously no program is developed in a vacuum. And so as much as I would love to wave a magic wand and unilaterally develop a program, it really is evaluating the context of everything else that goes into elementary scheduling, personnel acquisition, all those other pieces to make it work. So the key is just continuing to have conversations in the appropriate contexts, as we look at elementary program development and see how it can fit in as a piece to that. So it really has to be valued as a piece of larger tapestry.
Okay. When we've been meeting, we do each elementary school, and one of the questions I've been asking is about foreign languages. At least in that context, all the principals seem very much to have buy into this. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, I think everyone is interested. The interest is there. Obviously, the community support or community interest, I would say, is there. The logistical piece is, finding those qualified personnel who are dual certified, figuring out how to make it fit into the larger context of an elementary school day. The logistical pieces are significant, and so there's interest, and obviously where there's a will, there's often a way, but it will all certainly have to be part of larger conversation.
Last question before
Yeah.
I stop. How many staff are we talking? To give, let's say, 4th and 5th graders the 80 minutes that they minimally need. What does that look like in terms of numbers of people?
So I can't give a specific number on that right now, but what I can say is, obviously if we're offering in one building, we want to make sure that we're offering it in all our elementary buildings. So we're looking at 5 elementary schools, and then what we'd really have to look at is, how many teachers do we already have teaching in a particular area, and figure out sort of how many we would need based on the numbers in each building. So I can't answer that specifically, but I'd imagine if you're just looking at 4th and 5th grade, 1 to 2 teachers, depending on the building.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it depends on the building. Some buildings have larger populations than others. So
I was thinking of the orchestra model.
Yeah.
You have teachers moving between schools,
Mhm.
right? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, but then at that point, it would be a matter of hitting those number of minutes, right? We're not anywhere near 90 minutes a week on orchestra at the elementary level, right? No, right. So But it's interesting. I'm really grateful for this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my
Thank you.
pleasure.
I think it's really important.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
And our second presentation this evening is our fiscal update. I think,
We'll let Veronica
Okay.
go through the summary first, and then I'll follow up.
okay. I wasn't sure what order you wanted to.
Golden Audible.
Thank you. So, my name is Veronica, I don't even have a clicker. That's Don's presentation, I'll let him do that. So my name is Veronica, I'm a senior manager at Mengel Metzger Morg. And we finished our audit, and we met with the audit committee last month. Much more detail, so we'll spare you, going through that again. But we discussed all the numbers, what they meant, and we reviewed the findings and answered any questions or concerns that the committee members had. So therefore, we'll just do an executive summary. 2 pieces to the audit. We have the regular district financial statements, and then we have the extra classroom activity funds. For the financial statement audit, it was an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion that we're all looking for. And then because you had the federal expenditures over the $750,000, we also do a single audit. So there was also an unmodified opinion on compliance for the 2 major programs that you had, which was the Education Stabilization Funds, which is the continuation of those COVID dollars, and then child nutrition, so your school lunch, breakfast, and all of that. In terms of findings, we repeated one for journal entries, just to some entries that we made as a result of the audit procedures. And then a new finding was related to the child nutrition program procurement, just a technicality of looking over the vendors every year to check for their suspension or debarment status to make sure that they haven't been disallowed from having any federal funds. And there were no vendors found that had any. It's just a matter of doing that check on an annual basis. For the extra classroom audit, as you know, the purpose of extra class is just to teach the students about budgeting, reconciling a checkbook, running a little mini business for each club. So the state provides specific guidance that they expect each district to follow, and that can be a useful tool for the district, and it's why we have to have an audit of those funds and why they're on the cash basis. So this one, it is a qualified opinion due to the insufficient accounting controls over the cash receipts. So as discussed, it's not specific to your district. All of our districts have this just because there's so little controls you can do from when the students collect it to when it makes it to your central treasurer. And the management letter for that has findings and recommendations, which there's nothing special here. They're very common with other districts, and those were provided in more detail on the letter. And John and his team, thank you for all the help. There's a lot of questions, a lot of support, but they do a great job, and it was nice to do a repeat back on site, for sure. Any questions?
I don't have questions.
No? I'll let you have your presentation then.
Thank you.
You so much.
Thank you.
So Veronica provided a brief executive summary to what was presented to the audit committee, which is a large document that you folks will be voting on tonight, both in terms of the external audit, the associated corrective action plan. But I always thought it's important to give you sort of the tale of the tape of what the end of the year financials look like, both in terms of budget to actual for 23-24 and where our financials for 23-24 stacked up to some prior years. So bear with me for on 2 fronts. One, there's a lot of numbers here. Second, I'm still battling a cold here, so I will try to get through this as fast as possible without coughing in the microphone too often. Before I start, just a word of thanks to both staff in the business office, department heads, staff and colleagues at MMB and Company. This is a very arduous process in a very, very constrained time period. Usually takes over the course of the summer. Everyone else is enjoying time at the lake or in the mountains. We're, crunching numbers in the business office. So we don't mind it, but I did want to recognize the time and dedication, effort and resources, both internally and externally. Always start with revenue, because without the revenue, we don't have the expenditures. So a side-by-side comparison of where the major revenue streams for the 23-24 budget stack up against 23-24 actual. Good news is that the district was pretty close, almost spot on in the number of these revenue buckets or pots. The one area I do want to highlight is the interest category, where you'll see roughly $2.8 million above budget. that's really associated with the district's maximization of its financial resources in investment, in interest-bearing accounts. So that number in terms of global interest is only on the general fund side. We had additional interest earnings on both our F fund, our food service fund, and our capital fund. So just on the general fund side alone, roughly $2.8 million above budget, which was, we were happy to see that. I do not anticipate that same level in 24-25, only because of the pullback at the Fed level in terms of interest rates. Overall, total receipts actual over the budget, just under $3.2 million on the surplus side. On the expenditure side, anything on the negative shows that we had expenditures that were below what were budgeted. So between general support, instructional, transportation, employee benefits, debt service, and transfers, we had a operating surplus of roughly $5.2 million. So the $5.2 million coupled with the $3.2 million gives you where you stood on an operating budget of roughly $8.2 million of surplus actual compared to budget. There's a below the line adjustment here in terms of transfer to capital of roughly $4.7 million. That was not budgeted for in 23-24, excuse me, because of the middle school auditorium capital project, which voters passed in October of 2023, which we had to amend the budget, do the transfer from capital reserves to fund that project. On the financial side now, what we reported, sort of extracted out of the document in your agenda, are your 23, 24 actuals compared to the prior 2 years. You'll see increases in your school taxes because of increases in the tax levy. Our pilots are roughly on where they were in the prior year, a little bit lower because of some pilots rolling off. I do want to highlight again, for benefit of the board and the public at large, that pilots in general will be significantly different for our 25-26 budget because of the roll-off of the PSEG pilot at roughly $3.5 million. So overall, roughly a $5.1 million increase in receipts on the revenue side between last year and this year. Same on the general fund side on the various expenditure categories. You'll see how they stack up for a change of roughly $5.5 million. I want to highlight on the fringe benefits because this is one of the larger growing areas of the budget that the district is paying particularly close attention to, particularly with regard to health insurance. You can see that health insurance general, which is both our medical and our pharmaceutical coverage, came in at just under $15.5 million for an increase of $1.3 million compared to the prior year. That's just under about a 10% increase year over year. That growth remains the same for 24-25 that we're seeing. Actually, it's a tick higher, really associated with pharmaceutical coverage. TRS and ERS are our retirement contributions, which are on par with prior years. Those can fluctuate year to year based on the stock market. Overall, a $1.8 million increase in fringe expenditures year over year. Okay, fund balance and reserves. This is the district's various savings accounts that we can use for particular purposes or for rainy day funds. The board back in June, July-ish, provided the business office with the necessary authorization to fund various reserves in accordance with state regulation compared to where we were with regard to funding. Some changes, you'll see workers' comp decreased a little bit because that's based on our five-year average of incurred costs. Employee benefits, I had some room to increase based on where the district was with regard to compensated absences. ERS and TRS, I was able to increase a little bit, particularly on the TRS side because of the way the state regulations are worded. The capital repair reserve is something I want to highlight. You may recall that the 22 capital reserve is capped at a $20 million contribution rate. Presently, there's $14.3 million in that capital reserve, which is a great number. The 14.3 doesn't really showcase how close we are to that cap of 20 million because every year we're either putting money in and putting out, right? So the 22 capital reserve was tapped both for the 21 capital project as well as the middle school auditorium project. So really, we've used almost $16.6 million of that available cap of 20 million, which means I only have roughly $2.3 million left for that $20 million reserve. I know it says $14 million there, but keep in mind, I have already taken money out. Once I take out, it's something I can replenish.
Oh.
It's a one-time, once in terms of funding stream. I anticipate that for our 25-26 budget process, I'm going to be recommending to the board and the voters the creation of a new capital reserve, because I'll most likely tap out that 22 capital reserve. If not this year, the following year. Keep in mind that the middle school auditorium project and the 21 capital bond, there are some, excuse me, some leftover funding from both those projects that will wind up going back into the 22 capital reserve before we even get to the closeout process for 24-25. The undesignated fund balance of just under $4.6 million, that falls in line with the 4% threshold under real property tax law. We're not above it. If we were above it, there may be a finding on the financials, which there's not. And the state is starting to really look at fund balance in relation to the calculation of foundation aid. Quick summary of school lunch fund. Claire Grodin went over this briefly either last meeting or the meeting before in terms of where things stack up. This is on the revenue side. You can see that we were roughly $52,000 higher on the revenue side compared to 22-23. On the expenditure side, we were higher by roughly $135,000. That shortfall between, we were at $51,000 more in revenue, but we had $135,000 more in expenditures. That shortfall had to be made up, and we pulled that shortfall from the C funds, or the food service funds, fund balance. So you can see that the closing fund balance over the last 4 years, 21, 22, 22, 23, were those years where we had those extra or excess COVID funds that we eventually have drawn down. So for 23, 24, the fund balance for the C fund is just over $41,000, which is part of the reason why Claire came and said, hey, to avoid additional general fund subsidy, it may be necessary to increase meal prices going forward, which the board voted on last board meeting effective January 1st. So that sort of highlights, now that we have finalized numbers for 23, 24, the reason why we presented that in part and where the food service fund lines up.
Questions? If we do another capital reserve fund this coming year, is the 20 million the most that we can have, or could we have a bigger number?
You can do, and speaking with bond counsel, you can do a couple of different options. You can create a second, let's say the 2025 capital reserve at whatever dollar amount you want. given where we are in terms of capital project needs, coupled with the expense to actually get those projects done, I'm probably looking at a recommendation of roughly a $30 million capital reserve. You can combine the reserves, sort of, hey, voters, we're asking for a $50 million reserve by combining the 20 and the 30. So there's options, but you're not necessarily limited by the amount.
Questions? Questions?
No, one thing. How much certainty do we have on our pilots going forward? Like, what's our window for the next possible cliff?
The cliff is pretty steep.
Yeah.
Once the PSEG pilot. So we're at roughly $3.8 million worth of revenue on pilots. The PSEG alone is 3.5. So that gives us roughly 300,000. Those tend to phase out over the next couple of years. Most of those are tied with the Vista Technology Park.
Mm-hmm.
The only large one that is slated to come on is the Champlain Hudson Power pipeline, but that is really depending on how fast they get there. And there's a timing in terms of when they're finished versus when we actually the pilot revenue starts to roll. So
The big one.
$300,000 decrease over several years is more easily accommodated than a shortfall of 3.5 year to year.
And that's a 2-year cliff from now? Is it? I forget the exact time frame for how long that current pilot is.
The current pilot,
Yeah.
PSEG rolls off, this is the last year, our 24-25 school year is the
Okay.
last year. It was extended.
It got extended, right.
One additional year financially for the district. It actually ends December of 2025, but there's no benefit for the district financially for the 25-26 school year.
Okay.
Catherine, did you have something?
I just really wanted to underline and lift up something that you were saying, that you opened this with, John, and the amount of work that goes into it. When I was looking at the, excuse me, the note from the 87-page note, the memo from the auditor, which, uses really strong words to describe where we are, an overall positive and healthy financial position, applauding continuing to address financial pressures outside of our direct control, and noting careful management of financial resources and prudent planning. That all takes time and dedication and expertise of everybody in your shop, and I think it's far too easy for your team to mostly be noticed if or when something goes sideways, which it doesn't often. So
I appreciate that.
Please extend my
I
thanks
certainly will.
to everybody back at the
Thank you.
farm. Yeah.
That's a great reminder, yeah. I'll add to that, and she's right, a lot of goes into this, there's moving targets, and, people usually only chime in when there's something goes wrong, so thank you to you and your staff, thanks.
Well, there were a couple of instances where I actually boxed around with the auditors in a couple of instances in terms of, is this really a finding? Does it rise to the level of the finding that you're saying? We disagree here. And it's all collegial. They're coming from a position to make sure that, risk is being fairly articulated for the district. They are an external independent auditor. We have a little bit more skin in the game because it's our financials. I take it a little bit more personally than I actually sometimes do my own personal bank account. But overall, it was a much more streamlined audit. You may recall this time last year, we weren't looking at this until almost early January. State aid was at risk, not in terms of dollar value, but cash flow, because we had to get things in order to open up the tap. We'll be perfectly on schedule this year. Auditors were able to do their field work on site this year as opposed to remotely where we were faxing, and things just got bogged down that way. But overall, even the findings, I know they sound harsher than they may actually be in reality. You see these significant deficiencies, right? Like, oh my goodness, we have a significant deficiency. How can that possibly be? That is, the wording is harsher than the actual finding. So one item I didn't want to mention is you'll see that there was an adjusting journal entry of roughly $3 million. And we went round around with that in terms of, okay, is it truly a finding? Yes, it needs to be adjusted, but does it rise to the level of a significant deficiency? And it was how we categorize certain federal aid associated with a capital project. We had put it in the capital fund because it was associated with the capital fund. Auditors felt because it was federal fund, it had to hit the federal fund, the F fund first, and then have a separate transaction transferring the money out of the F fund into the capital fund. I was like, well, I have one pair of pants, whether the money's in the right pocket or the left pocket, it's still in the same pair of pants. So, but I raised that only because it looks like a significantly large journal entry,
Right.
and it was really an administrative ministerial change. So I appreciate those comments, so thank you.
Thank you for explaining that. One other thing on this extra curricular activities, which is not what it's called in the audit, but the clubs and all of that. This is something that has come up every year that I've been on the board, and as the auditor says, seems to be fairly standard because so much is moving with the clubs. At one point though, and I don't know if I'm directing this towards Jody or Dave to just remind me, we've been talking about, is there an opportunity for learning opportunity with the students, with treasurers who are in these positions? Is there some training to be provided? Is there anything that even if it doesn't, I take at face value the statement that there's so much moving here and that this is happening across the board and this is not a significant concern. But at one point there was a conversation around like, oh, is there a learning budgeting opportunity? Can we provide more training? I'm just wondering if we
did.
Yeah.
Where we do.
Good.
There's annual training.
Okay, great.
You know, in many ways, it's, there's so many parties involved here. You
Right.
have the
Right.
students, and it's really a student club. The advisors or mentors are really, truly just supposed to be that, like, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing from afar?
Right.
So
No,
trying
I
to
get
make
that.
sure that, and everyone's, these are, small dollar amount
Totally.
kid clubs, right? Like, I had a pizza party and, I
Didn't
paid
get the
with
receipt.
cash and I didn't keep this receipt
Right.
from Andrea. Like, so we're not talking,
Again, I'm not
laundering
coming
large
at this-
sums of money here between the ECA
Yeah.
accounts, but, there's a process, there's a protocol. We do try to remind students, club mentors, the individuals that sign on at the high school and middle school that oversee all the clubs as an auditing function, hey, really, because we're going to wind up finding it, in July and August, let's try to button some of these down, but.
I mean, I think she's less substantive than
Yes,
just the point
yes,
being
yes,
that
yeah.
the procedure itself could be educational for the kids to say, here's how you balance this, here's how you have to do it, that kind of stuff. Not so much the $17 for the pizza.
Right, exactly, thank you.
Okay.
And it sounds like we're
Yes,
working
good.
on
Doing
that
training
through the
and-
trainings, and I appreciate that, so thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Next is our recognition of public comment on an agenda item. If we have anyone who would like to address the board on an agenda item, please feel free to come to the microphone. Next, item 6, action items. A, finance action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 5.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. B, professional personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 7.
So moved.
Any discussion?
Yeah, it's probably a question for John, really. One of the items is, it's a trivial payment, but it's for something that happened like 3 weeks ago. It's the PSAT supervision fee, or stipend or payment or whatever. Isn't that a confirming purchase? Like, are we not following policy on that?
If the PO is issued after the invoice is received, it would be a confirming PO.
Just seems odd that we're approving, recommending we're approving a payment for something that already happened. I don't oppose it. I think it's perfectly fine. Was there a step that was missed here where we didn't do this 2 months ago?
Yeah, it's probably, because it's paid by a timesheet essentially. So in order to pay that timesheet, the person's name has to be listed on an agenda. So what probably happened was that the person was the lead proctor or whatever, submitted a timesheet, and the business office said, wait a minute, can't pay timesheet.
Hmm.
Rates established, positions established, person's name wasn't tied, so it was just a matter of the person should have been appointed prior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From an
Timing
auditing
issue.
perspective, if the auditors pulled a timesheet without the board authorization, that wind up, you'd see that next year's report.
That's what it seemed like, yeah.
Yeah, so this is, I don't know if the person was actually paid waiting for board approval. I'd have to double check on that. It was a small dollar amount. I think it was just, hey, to button everything up, let's make sure that we have the appropriate board authorization to pay the individual for the
Right.
services that were necessary.
Was there a process where this person should have submitted a pre-timesheet request or whatever? No? I don't
No, so typically, the counseling center that runs the PSATs, they usually submit a list of proctors and whoever the coordinator is going to be in advance, and we approve them.
Yeah.
So that
got
step
missed.
just got missed, yeah.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. C, support personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent, that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. D, other action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action item number 1.
So moved. Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Item 7, recognition of public comment on a non-agenda item. If anyone would like to address the board on a non-agenda item, please feel free to come to the microphone. Item 8, future meetings and events. Our next regular board meeting is on Wednesday, November 20th, and that's at Hamagrail Elementary School. Anticipating executive session at 6 and then reconvening to open session at 7. On Monday, November 25th, we have a facilities committee meeting at 5 o'clock and a policy committee meeting at 6, and those are both here in the district office. And then on Wednesday, December 4th, we are back here at the high school for a board meeting. Again, anticipating executive session at 6 and reconvening to open session at 7. Seeing no need to go back into executive session, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.